Mike Harmon. Mr. Harmon, would you please join us? Let's make him feel welcome.
How's everybody doing? All right, was glad to see the Bank of England. Actually, I was a mortgage broker at one time as well, so it's always good. Well, it's my pleasure to be here in London-Laurel County today to discuss the work of our office as we increase transparency and accountability at state and local levels. Now, when I took office in January of 2016, I basically gave our staff a directive. I said, I don't want to hear that you've targeted anyone. I don't want to hear that you've given anybody a pass. I just simply want you to follow the data. And that's what we've done. We've followed the data, and to be honest with you, we kind of coined that phrase as well, so much so that we even developed our own pins, follow the data, pins. But of course now full disclosure, no tax dollars were used to purchase our lapel pins. Our executive staff, we kind of chipped in together and got that taken care of. Now, before I actually get deep into the speech, I always like to start with something funny. Usually I tell a joke, but lately I'm relating, unfortunately, a true story. A couple of weeks ago, I was coming back from Pike County, and unfortunately it was during heavy rains. I'm getting really tired of rain, but hopefully, I don't want it to go away completely, but just for a while. And was coming back from Pike County, and they happened to divert me away from a mudslide. Well, they diverted me away from a mudslide, but they diverted me right into high water. So, unfortunately, I didn't see it until it was too late, and ran my car into it. And so I thought I would be able to help, maybe get my car out or do something, but I didn't want to mess up my shoes, so I took my shoes off and I left them in the car. It didn't work. Later on, the water got up and ruined it. But during the process, I ended up getting away from my car, and so I spent the entire night basically full suit, tie, wet socks, no shoes. Now, we ended up going to like a rescue squad area, and I was and everywhere I went, those people that, like myself that go around, everywhere we go, I was introducing myself. Hi, I'm Mike Harmon, Kentucky State Auditor. Hi, I'm Mike Harmon, Kentucky State Auditor. Well, I meet this one lady. Her husband said, let me introduce you to my wife. And so he introduced me and said, Mike Harmon. And she said, Mike Harmon. So, we've got a Mike Harmon too. And I said, you do? And she said, yes, but he's a mortician. I said, well, that's where we differ. Everybody's dying to see him. No one's dying to see the auditor. So, thankfully, Representative John Blanton, I don't know if you know John, he was pinned in too, but he coordinated us being able to stay into a bed and breakfast. But before we went into the bed and breakfast, the guy that had the bed and breakfast, he took us up to Speedway. He said, I don't have any food in the bed and breakfast. So, I went to Speedway, and I was shaking hand. Hi, I'm Mike Harmon, Kentucky State Auditor. Well, after I introduced myself, remember, full suit, tie, wet socks, no shoes. But I decided to go, after I introduced myself, go and try to find something to eat, something to drink. Well, I hear him get on the phone, and he says, guess what? We've got the Kentucky State Auditor here. And he pauses, and he doesn't have any shoes on. So, I don't know. Once I had a county clerk tell me that I was the funniest auditor she had ever seen. And I said, well, that's a good thing, because no one loves the auditor for anything else. But like I said, it's an honor to be here. To kind of give you a background, my office conducts more than about 600 audits a year, ranging from audits of our county sheriffs, our clerks, our fiscal courts, conducting special exams. And really one of the biggest special exams that we conducted in this last year, which I know is of a great interest to this area, is that of KentuckyWired, the agency, and the agency that manages that is the Kentucky Communications Network Authority, or KCNA. Now, as you may or may not know, KentuckyWired is a project that is seeking to build a middle-mile fiber optic internet network to reach all 120 counties. So really, it's the project itself is not designed to get it directly to the houses. It's not directly to get to where it's really to build that middle mile to spread. Now, when KentuckyWired was first announced in 2014, most of the project funding was supposed to come from the private sector, with only a small percentage coming from the Commonwealth, including $30 million appropriated by the General Assembly during the 2014 legislative session. That's because KentuckyWired was announced as a public-private partnership, and it was really a public-private partnership before there was actually public-private partnership legislation. A lot of people call them P3s. And basically what it was supposed to do, that public-private partnership, the private company was supposed to bear the main cost of construction and maintain more than 3,400 miles of fiber optic cable. Now, but what we found when we did our audit was instead that KentuckyWired is nearly $100 million over budget for construction costs, and this has been several months since we released this. And the original planned completion date, it's already passed. It's actually about two and a half years past. Meanwhile, the taxpayers are still on the hook for availability payments for basically a network that currently is not available. Now, through the work of our auditors on the examination of KentuckyWired, we've determined that over the 30-year P3 agreement, we will be, and we being the taxpayers, will be on the hook for almost $1.5 billion. That's a billion with a B. Of course, the most troubling thing to me about what we found in our examination of KentuckyWired is that a decision was made, basically what I would call flip the script. You know, like I said, initially what it was supposed to be is you had an initial appropriation from Congressman Rogers, which I'll talk about in just a little bit. And I'm so thankful. I mean, Congressman Rogers is a wonderful individual. He cares so much about his people, and we appreciate all that he does. And he had worked to appropriate $23.5 million to try to get internet, high-speed internet, to eastern Kentucky. And as I said, also, then they decided to take this statewide, and they had the state appropriate $30 million, you know, to go towards that as well, to do it statewide. But they did this P3 agreement. And in the original construction of this P3 agreement, they did an RFP, which is a request for proposal. And in that proposal, in the response to the proposal, they were supposed to take on pole attachments. They were supposed to take on getting private funding. So the limit was supposed to be the $30 million. Well, they flipped the script, and between that original RFP and response to when they signed the project agreement, they just completely turned the tables. They signed that project agreement before Governor Beshear headed out, and it basically put the responsibility for getting those pole attachments and put the responsibility tying to basically the bond rating of Kentucky when they went to do the tax-free bonds. And that agreement was signed about September of 2015, like I said, right as Governor Beshear was heading out. Now, like I said, rather than allowing the private sector to raise the capital, they decided to go with a nonprofit entity called KWIC, KentuckyWired Infrastructure Company, to issue these tax-exempt financing for the project. Now, why is that a problem? Well, the problem is if they had stuck with private investors, if what they were working on had failed, well, it would be on the private investors, no offense to private investors, but it wouldn't be on the taxpayers. But instead, when they went to tax-free bonds, it basically tied it to our credit rating. So with that decision was made not only to issue Commonwealth-backed debt, but also to make a contractual commitment that taxpayers would back availability payments, or in this case, as we say, non-availability payments and other costs. It essentially rejected the proposal by the main private contractor to fully fund the project through outside capital. This decision also created a potential for the Commonwealth's bond rating to be impacted in any termination scenario. Now, the bonding not only places a considerable burden on taxpayers, but also actually removed a lot of the incentive for the private contractors to complete KentuckyWired project in a timely fashion. Now, in addition to misleading taxpayers on their share of the burden to build KentuckyWired, taxpayers were also misled regarding to the revenue streams that they were going to use to finance the network. Now, when the project was initially announced, it was anticipated that Kentucky's K-12 school would switch from private providers to KentuckyWired. Now, this was important because the school received what they called federal E-rate money for certain information technology expenditures, including the broadband internet services. However, one requirement for E-rate funding is that the service be obtained through a fair, competitive bidding process. Now, our auditors learned that as early as January of 2015, officials at the Kentucky Department of Education expressed internal concerns that KentuckyWired would not be E-rate eligible. Now, in June of 2015, Kentucky's Education Commissioner sent a letter to the Secretary of Finance Cabinet clearly stating that the contractual setup of KentuckyWired prevented it from being E-rate eligible. Now, despite these repeated warnings and concerns from KDE, the Finance Cabinet signed a project agreement to build the network and moved forward with an RFP on the K through 12 internet services, the E-rate that we talked about. Now, a private internet provider challenged the RFP, alleging this procurement is riddled with conflicts of interest and insider preferences that fly in the face of the federal E-rate regulations and Kentucky statutory requirements, end quote. And the Finance Cabinet at that time decided to cancel the RFP. Now, they had already signed the project agreement, but they canceled the RFP. As a result, there is no current plan to transfer K through 12 schools to KentuckyWired. Now, K through 12 schools constituted 45%, nearly half of the funding that they were counting on to build this project for the availability payments over the 30-year agreement. Now, the loss of that 45% will significantly increase the financial burden to the Commonwealth and its taxpayers. Now, since the release of our examination of KentuckyWired, I've discussed several scenarios of what could happen, to move the project forward. Now, I think if the project had been originally done as intended by Congressman Rogers, which is to provide high-speed internet to the 5th Congressional District, it probably would have been done by now. And I've advocated for the possibility of going back out and rebidding the project and perhaps partnering with our utilities, our telephone, and our cooperatives, and building out the fiber internet system. It's one of those things that when they changed they really changed the procurement during that 9-month period. Had they bid it the way that they ended it, you probably would have had 5 or 6 companies. Macquarie, the one that actually took the bid, was an Australian company. My guess is you'd probably have 5 or 6 Kentucky companies, especially if they bid it the way that they ended up with it. Now, we're seeing surrounding states like West Virginia and Virginia, and most recently Mississippi, take pretty much the same approach that I just talked about. There is no reason why we can't pursue the same concept here with KentuckyWired. Now, you're certainly welcome to review our special examination of KentuckyWired and our other exams my office has done, including the first ever outside examination of the Administrative Office of the Courts in history at auditor.ky.gov. Now, the interesting thing about the first ever audit of the Administrative Office of the Courts, or AOC, I had one congressman in another area, not Congressman Rogers, but another congressman in another area, say he just got so excited when he heard the words AOC. You're auditing AOC. I said, different AOC. It's the Administrative Office of the Courts, not the congresswoman that just recently got up there. But one of the things that we found was that we had 20 findings. And by the way, I want to thank Chief Justice Minton for inviting us in. But one of the things that we did find was that the Administrative Office of the Courts had actually leased space for one of the judges and did so from what we found out was a company that was owned by the justice's 2 sons. And as it turned out, it was 3 times as much as the next closest bid, with really no documentation as to why they did it. Of course, now, the funny thing is after we released our audit, they said, well, that's what the bids were, but that's not really what it ended up, and it ended up less than that. I was like, well, how much did it end up at? It's like, well, just twice as much, not 3 times, just twice as much. So, okay, well, I guess that makes it okay. Anyway, just kidding. Now, as I mentioned earlier, my office conducts more than 600 audits per year. Most of those are focused on county audits, fiscal courts, county clerks, and county sheriffs. Now, from those county audits, we have what we term as findings, which are issues our auditors have identified that could lead to bigger problems if they aren't addressed. Now, because of many of the county fiscal courts and agencies we audit are small, we often identify concerns relating to lack of oversight or lack of segregation of duties. And what that means is that in some counties or are not really supervising or cross-checking work in key areas like the financial aspect of their operations. Now, the lack of oversight and the lack of segregation of duties is often the cornerstone of what leads to bigger problems because it inhibits the level of accountability and transparency when it comes to public funds. Now, 2 examples of county audits we conducted that shows how lack of oversight and segregation of duties can put counties in dire straits. One of those was actually in your neighboring county, Jackson County. their finding, fiscal court in 2015, 2016 had a combined 75 findings. Now, the biggest issue we identified was the county's former treasurer had written more than $114,000 in checks. She had written herself checks from the county funds totaling more than about $54,000 and around $60,000 in checks from a federal grant the county had received for emergency preparedness related to the Bluegrass Army Depot. Now, we referred her findings to the FBI, and a federal grand jury indicted her on charges of theft, wire fraud, and aggravated identity theft. Now, the federal investigation discovered additional funds had allegedly been stolen by the former treasurer, which raised the total to $162,000. She just recently pled guilty in February of this year to aggravated identity theft and wire fraud, and she will be formally sentenced in June. Now, the other county where we found was in Pike County, and I want to take just a second. When I talk about segregation of duties, I know I talked a little bit about it. Do you all know when I talk about segregation of duties what I'm talking about? Okay. Because a lot of times some of our officials, they're not excited. And I understand why they're not excited about it, because it's hard if you've got small staffs. So what I do is I share with them a small joke that I have that really, unless you've been audited or you're in the business, you may not be as comfortable with it. But did you hear about the auditor that was really concerned about his pet dog? His dog was using the bathroom in the exact same place, so he was really concerned about segregation of duties. Okay, I'm sorry. I'll just move on. Anyway, the other county that we found issues was in Pike County. I know, I'm dad joke central. So, following release of our audit in Pike County Fiscal Court in East Kentucky, in which we found issues, the county's record keeping, financial management practice, and no oversight of the county's treasurer, credit rating agency, S&P Global, withdrew its credit rating of Pike County's ability to repay its debts. And I'm going to step out of speech just for a second. Our office has been working diligently to make sure that fiscal courts gets their audits done in a timely fashion. And even if we're not doing them, if the CPA is doing them, we try to work, because what we're finding is a lot of these rating agencies are watching a lot closer. And so you're seeing some of their bond ratings be poor if they don't get their audits in a timely fashion. So we've worked with them diligently to try to keep those moving. Now, our audit found the Pike County Treasurer, who has since retired, didn't complete bank reconciliations for fiscal year 2016 until the following October. The Treasurer also overstated the county's expenditures by nearly $5.5 million when she filed the county's financial report with the Department of Local Government. Now, the county has since taken the necessary steps towards rectifying the situation, but it will take time for them to restore their credit rating. Now, in both of these examples, our auditors found little to no oversight in regards to the county treasurers, which, when left unchecked, can lead to potential criminal charges, and at a minimum, as in Pike County, can have a drastic impact on their ability to function. Now, if counties like Jackson and Pike had set up strong oversight over areas like handling of finances, perhaps they would have avoided issues like impact of their credit rating or being in a massive financial hole that will take the county and its taxpayers many years to recover. Again, whether it's a county government or a major infrastructure project like KentuckyWired, the basic lack of transparency and accountability in the end places an undue burden on taxpayers. And if we are to grow our Commonwealth, which we do, as a whole, and put Kentucky on a competitive level in drawing in new business and investment, it is key that we have a well-run and transparent government. Now, it doesn't matter which branch of government, it doesn't matter if it's local, state, or federal, if we are not conducting public business in an efficient, effective, and ethical way, there is a failure on how we manage the taxpayers' money. Now, the people we all serve as public leaders, of course, do expect us to do better and to do the best that we can. Now, that's why in the auditor's office we strive each day to make sure government is managing the resources provided to them by the taxpayers in an efficient manner, and that they are held accountable when they are not. Now, I would invite you to learn more about our office at auditor.ky.gov. Also, you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. And of course, if you have any tips of waste, fraud, or abuse about government, I tell everybody we're the people's auditor. We're not the IRS. We're the people's auditor. Usually I get applause with that. You're not the IRS, but we're the people's auditor. But if you have tips of waste, fraud, or abuse, you can go to auditor.ky.gov where you can also see our audits. But there's a tips line you can click on, or you can call 1-800-KY-ALERT. Once again, it's been my honor and my pleasure to be here. Thank you. God bless, and certainly I welcome any questions if you have questions.
Does anybody have any questions? I'm so glad you didn't mention